Imagine standing before a conqueror whose name could empty cities before his armies arrived. Genghis Khan didn't just wage war, he turned death into spectacle. Nobles were wrapped in carpets and crushed beneath galloping horses so their sacred blood would never touch the earth. Greedy governors met their end with molten silver poured into their eyes and ears. Others were sealed inside animal hides, left to suffocate as the leather shrank in the sun. Each execution was a message. Every scream a warning carved into memory. This was not chaos, it was policy, a language of fear spoken fluently across continents. Genghis Khan conquered not only with arrows and steel, but with terror so calculated it could make the living surrender before a single battle began. Subscribe for more dark history. Long before he became a legend, Genghis Khan was Temujin, a boy born into hunger, betrayal, and endless struggle on the frozen steppes of Mongolia. In this harsh land, mercy was weakness, and survival demanded dominance. The steppe forged men who saw life and death as tools, not opposites. When Temujin united the Mongol tribes, he didn't just build an army. He created a new kind of warfare, one where terror itself became a weapon sharper than any blade. Behind the chaos of conquest stood order, the Yasa, Genghis Khan's secretive code of laws. It bound his empire in discipline and terror alike. Though fragments survive, its message is clear. Loyalty was sacred, betrayal unforgivable. Petty theft might earn mercy, but defying the Khan meant only one outcome: death made into example, punishment into prophecy. For nobles and kings, Genghis Khan reserved a death as elegant as it was horrifying. Mongol tradition held that royal blood was sacred. It must never touch the earth, or the spirits would be angered. To obey this belief and amplify its terror, the Khan ordered his royal captives wrapped tightly in carpets or thick felt, then trampled to death beneath galloping horses. There was no clash of swords, no cries of defiance, only the dull rhythm of hooves and the fading sound of muffled screams. Chroniclers wrote of carpets darkening and flattening as life drained away unseen. No blood spilled, yet the humiliation was absolute. In a culture that glorified open battle, to die bound and sightless, crushed in darkness was worse than execution. It was erasure. Power itself reduced to silence beneath the feet of beasts. Among Mongol punishments, none inspired more dread than the glittering cruelty of molten silver. It was not mindless savagery, it was symbolism made flesh. Those blinded by greed and deaf to justice would meet their end the same way they had lived. The tale of Inalchuk, governor of Otra, became legend. After he murdered a Mongol caravan and defied Genghis Khan's call for justice, the Khan's envoys were slain, an insult that sealed his fate. When Otra fell, Inalchuk was captured and condemned. Before a silent crowd, crucibles of silver were heated until they glowed white. Executioners held him fast as the molten metal was poured into his eyes and ears. His screams echoed, then faded, leaving only the hiss of cooling metal. The corpse remained on display, silver trails hardened like tears. The message needed no translation. Betray the Khan, and your greed will consume you. Some deaths sought not just to end a life, but to erase its very memory. High-born captives like Turkan Khatun, mother of the Khwarezmian Sultan, were sewn into the freshly flayed hide of a horse or ox. As the hide dried in the sun, it tightened inch by inch, crushing the body and suffocating the lungs. Witnesses described the sound of strained breathing, then silence. No grave, no name, no monument, only the stench of decay. For Genghis Khan, this was true annihilation. Death that left nothing behind. For those who betrayed the Khan, death came slowly, wrapped in water and despair. The condemned were locked inside wooden cages just large enough to stand or crouch, then lowered into a river. They could see the surface, the light shimmering above, but never reach it. Each rise and fall of the cage brought fleeting hope. one gasp of air before the water closed again. Witnesses said the screams turned to gurgles, then to silence, as the river swallowed them whole. It was punishment by reflection. The traitor drowned in his own broken loyalty. By the end of his life, Genghis Khan's wrath turned from men to nations. The Tangut kingdom of Western Xia had defied him one time too many, and his vengeance became apocalyptic. Their king was kept alive to witness the end. Cities razed, temples burned, libraries turned to ash. Scholars were hunted down, their written language deliberately erased. Then, as his world vanished, the king himself disappeared from history. Some say poisoned, others buried alive in an unmarked grave. No records, no memorial, only absence. The execution of a civilization complete. For the Mongols, this was the truest form of victory. To make memory itself obey the Khan. For captured generals who had fought bravely against him, Genghis Khan chose death by 1,000 arrows, a spectacle of skill and control. The condemned was tied upright as Mongol archers took aim, striking limbs and flesh, but sparing the heart until the very end. Each shot was deliberate, every scream part of the performance. When the final arrow flew, it carried a message across continents. Even courage could not shield you from Mongol precision. Under Genghis Khan's grandson, Guyuk, execution became an art of slow inevitability. The condemned were laid beneath wooden platforms as soldiers piled stones, iron weights, even corpses on top, one by one. Each creak of timber marked another breath stolen, another inch closer to death. Witnesses could hear ribs snapping like branches, see blood seeping through the cracks. The horror wasn't the violence itself, it was the waiting, the helpless awareness of what was coming. Death arrived not in a single blow, but as a steady, deliberate descent of power pressing the life from below. Few punishments revealed Mongol cruelty more clinically than progressive amputation. It was not a single act of violence, but a ritual of dismemberment stretched across days. Executioners began with fingers and toes, binding tightly to slow the bleeding before cutting clean through the joints. Each wound was cauterized with burning oil to keep the victim alive for the next session. Between mutilations, they were fed and forced to wait, knowing another part of them would soon be taken. By the end, body and mind were both carved hollow, their humanity sliced away piece by piece. When the Khan wished the heavens themselves to judge a soul, he left the condemned to the desert. Stripped of clothing and supplies, they were abandoned in the endless silence of the Gobi. In summer, the sun burned their skin to leather, tongues swelling as thirst drove them mad. In winter, the cold crept in like a predator, freezing blood before mercy could. Some tried to crawl, leaving trails that ended in stillness. There were no executioners, no blades, only time, wind, and the indifferent sky. Death came slowly, as if the earth itself were swallowing its offering. For enemy cavalry commanders, Genghis Khan reserved a poetic cruelty, to be killed by their own horses. The men were tied to the ground as their mounts, panicked and driven forward, crushed them beneath iron-shod hooves. Bones shattered, lungs collapsed, and faith turned to horror. Even loyalty's closest companion could become an instrument of betrayal. When entire cities resisted, the Mongols answered with annihilation on an industrial scale. After sieges like Nishapur, prisoners, soldiers, merchants, women, and children were forced into massive pits. The first layer lay face down, others were stacked on top until the weight crushed the living beneath. Screams merged into one endless roar of suffocation and breaking bones. Some victims lived for hours, pinned in darkness under the dead. When the noise finally stopped, the Mongols left the mounds untouched, fields of bodies baking under the sun. There were no markers, no prayers, only a warning carved from flesh. Defiance brings burial alive. Adapted from Persian torment, the boats turned decay into slow execution. The condemned was wedged between two hollowed logs, leaving only the head, hands and feet exposed. They were force-fed milk and honey until sickness bloated their stomach, then smeared with the same mixture to lure flies. Under the sun, the air thickened with insects. Maggots bred in the waste that pooled beneath them. Flesh began to rot while the victim still breathed. Each hour brought new swarms, new bites, new delirium. For days they lingered, half living, half rotting, until infection or dehydration finally claimed what mercy would not. Few deaths better displayed how patience could be crueler than blades. Before the blade ever fell, Genghis Khan often destroyed a person's honor. Defeated rulers were dressed in women's clothes, paraded on donkeys, and forced to proclaim their own cowardice before jeering crowds. By the time execution came, their legacy was already dead. The body's end was almost merciful compared to the ruin of reputation. When vengeance demanded more than blood, the Mongols destroyed life itself. Cities were burned, irrigation systems shattered, and farmlands salted until nothing could grow. It was execution on a civilizational scale, the death not of people, but of the possibility of tomorrow. The land itself became the Khan's final victim. Behind every Mongol atrocity lay calculation. Terror wasn't chaos, it was policy. News of brutal deaths spread faster than armies, making cities surrender before battle even began. Executions saved Mongol lives by turning fear into obedience, yet the cost was immense. Every crushed king, every silenced city left echoes of trauma that outlived the empire itself. The witnesses carried those memories home, embedding terror deep into cultural memory. For the Mongols, fear was the cheapest weapon ever forged. For their victims, it was an inheritance of nightmares that lingered long after the hoofbeats faded. Genghis Khan's empire proved that terror could conquer, but not endure. Fear built walls of submission, yet none of loyalty. After his death, the empire fractured, its unity eroded by the same violence that had created it. Still, his methods reshaped warfare forever. From medieval sieges to modern propaganda, the lesson remained. Terror works quickly, but it never lasts. Genghis Khan ruled through fear, but terror never endures. Power built on cruelty always consumes itself in the end.